good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and a very warm welcome to our webinar together with SaaSrooms, Thinking Machine, and Simfoni, all about how to save up to 30% on your SaaS and IT spend in just 30 days. Sounds brilliant, doesn't it? And we're going to dig into that and show you how on today's session. Just a quick introduction from my side. My name is James Meads, and I will be your host for this webinar. I am the founder of procurementsoftware.site, which is a completely free-to-use directory where you can find over 320 procurement technology solutions at the click of a button. You can find what you're searching for in less time than it takes to boil an egg. So that's really how I came about hosting this. I've got to know the three guys that are going to be presenting and on the panel today because they are all founders of procurement technology companies that, at least in Thinking Machine and SaaSrooms, examples specifically focus on IT spend. So we're going to go live. We're going to get going in just a couple of minutes. Let's just wait and see if anyone is just joining a couple of minutes late, and then we'll get started. And I will introduce you to each of the participants and the panelists in today's webinar. And just a couple of quick things from a housekeeping perspective. If you want to raise a question, then on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a section that says comments. If you click on that, you can just type your comment or your question into that section. We will then see that it's come in. We can flash it up on the screen by way of magic, and we can then put your question to any of the panelists. So don't be shy at any point during this webinar. If you want to ask a question, pop it in there, and we will use an opportune moment in the presentation to make sure that you get your questions answered. Okay, so we are also going to be recording this webinar, just to make you aware. So we will be able to send you a link to the recording after the session. So if, for example, you have a phone call in the middle of the presentation and you don't want to miss what we're presenting, we will get that across to you after today's session as well. So don't worry about missing any of it. So without any further ado, it's now 3 minutes past the hour. So I'm going to hand over really quickly to each of our three panelists and presenters and get them to give just a really quick whistle-stop introduction, and then we'll dive straight in. So Philip, over to you first as the founder of SaaSrooms. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you very much, James. Nice to have you here, and thank you for hosting this this mini event. My background is in procurement, like I think everyone else on this call. I've started SaaSrooms now a bit over a year ago. It's a very interesting space due to the sort of challenges around sourcing of SaaS, which we're going to talk about today. But my background is in strategic sourcing. I've worked as procurement director in a number of tech companies over the years. Lastly, at Microsoft. Looking forward to talking to you today about these topics.
Excellent. Thank you, Philip. And it's actually very early in the morning where you are. So congratulations for getting up at, 5 a.m. to be able to do this. Yes. So now, Mr. Richard Martin, go for it, sir. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, James. Really nice to be here. I guess my background might be a little bit different. I'm come from more on the supply side. So you might not be able to tell from the accent. Originally Australian, working for particularly Telstra, which is one of the largest telecom operators in the world. My background there was as a department head, and we used to deliver a managed service to our largest enterprise accounts, which was specifically focused around billing. Basically, these enterprises would invest large sums in us just to have dedicated bums on seats to constantly analyze and make sense of their contracts and bills for them every month. And of course, not just us, our customers are investing in contract management platforms, expense management platforms. And yet, despite this heavy investment, issues would still arise all the time because, as we discovered, contract and billing data is just so complicated to get into, particularly within categories like IT. So this was really the genesis of Thinking Machine, rather. We, along with SaaSrooms and Simfoni, help enterprises to automate the lifecycle of IT spend optimization. Originally started in telecom, we now cover many other categories of IT. But thanks for having me.
Excellent. And then last but not least, Stefan, over to you. And Simfoni has been around a lot longer than Thinking Machines and SaaSrooms. So you're maybe a little bit more of a household name, but I'll let you introduce Simfoni and what Simfoni does.
Yeah, we feel like there's a sort of old man in the room, really. I mean, we were born in 2015, which is not that long ago, but the speed of technology, etc., is so fast. So we're maybe a bit of an established name. So nice to meet everyone. I'm co-founder of Simfoni. As I mentioned, we were born, as I call it, in 2015. We're a global business, and we've got operations across North America, Europe, Middle East, and all the way down to Australia as well. And what we do, we're a next generation, as I call it, next generation spend automation and analytics business. So we've got a portfolio of products that we call it Compose, to plug and play into clients' existing systems, but we also work with those clients that previously couldn't, access digital procurement. So the phrase we use is that we democratize procurement technology for the masses. That's what we're doing. I'm also a procurement guy. I've been doing procurement for 23, 24 years plus. I actually come from a sales and marketing background and came into procurement a long time ago. So I've both headed and run procurement functions. I've also worked in consulting globally, doing transformations, most of that around technology. And I started my career, though, because it's very relevant for this conversation, as an IT category manager. That was my very first job in procurement. So I'm very familiar with the space from a practitioner perspective, and kind of only sort of wish that these solutions that Richard and Philip will talk about were around back in my day. So pleased to meet you all.
Yeah, it's really interesting. IT's, I'm a procurement guy as well, and IT's one of the categories that I've never touched and never managed in my corporate career. So I'm looking forward to learn something about IT now. And as you say, Stefan, it's great now that someone coming into a category role, assuming that they've got the budget, can go out and buy something like SaaSrooms or Thinking Machine, or even Simfoni if they want more of an as a service spend automation platform. To get to grips with that. So I think I'm going to hand over now then to you, Richard Wright, to take us through a few slides. For anyone that's listening and watching, ask questions in the comment section as we go along. And if we don't have the opportunity to pop your question up during the presentation, we will tackle it at the end. So stay online and we will have then a Q&A session for anything that we can't cover during the presentation. So yeah, Richard, Philip, over to you.
Great. So, as the title of the webinar is, we're going to be exploring how to save 30% on IT and SaaS within 30 days. Specifically, by the end of this session, you'll not only have a clear understanding of what kind of savings are possible within your IT categories, you'll also have a toolbox for generating 30% savings that includes a framework for analyzing contracts and invoices, and challenges and best practices for implementing opportunities in your business. So let's dive in. Just to start with the third slide. The data that's shown in this visual, and this is just to frame up what categories we mean when we say IT. So the data shown in this visual is taken from the Gartner IT Worldwide Spending Forecast, which they release annually. Interestingly enough, there's actually two different forecasts that Gartner uses here. One is for IT categories that does not include SaaS, which is under public cloud here, and then the whole other forecast, which is just dedicated to the growing category of public cloud, since it is growing incredibly every year. So what we've done here is we've combined these two areas together, so we can show you a full size of the pie. What you're seeing here is communication services, which is telecom, IT services, professional services, enterprise software, which is actually not SaaS as you might think, but more license-based, say SAP, Oracle, Microsoft licensing, things like this, devices, public cloud, and data center. basically, between Thinking Machine and SaaSrooms, we're covering 82% of global IT budgets. Now, it's interesting to note here that while cloud is growing at a very rapid rate, of course, IT services is actually growing at a rate of 6% this year. And telecom services, although not really growing much, not declining much either. And, of course, remains to be the largest area of IT spend. So we're showing you all of this just to highlight that in order to capture the full savings opportunity, we really need to take a holistic approach across all of these categories.
So Richard, I think it was, to be fair, I think it was actually this kind of representation of all the different spend buckets that sort of inspired us to do this particular update or webinar, because I think between Simfoni, Thinking Machine, and SaaSrooms, we have solutions here to address all these buckets. And it's, if I think of, for example, from my own point of view, when I used to be an IT category manager, I mean, to try and produce a strategy for each of these buckets, cover all the subcategories, I mean, it's a daunting task, especially if you don't have the tools, the data, the insight to do all of this. It'll take you months just to get kind of like started and have your plans ready. So for me, it's a great proposition if you can actually get the grips of all of this in one go.
I completely agree, and I think that is the basic value proposition of what these new breed of solutions like SaaSrooms, like Thinking Machine, and even Simfoni are about. No one has the time and resource to fully explore all the data that's available across these categories. And even if you did have the time to go through it all, you still need an expert at the end of it to be able to explain to you what that data even means. These are obviously very niche, specialized categories. So there's just an enormous amount there. So I think that ability to be able to take away that restraint on time and resource and increase that speed to value is really critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
So naturally, on the computer, this looks perfect. And on the webinar, there's a bit of an overlap there. But what that's trying to show is 24% for contract negotiations, 13% for value leakage, and 3% for billing mistakes. And what we're showing here is that across all of those IT categories, you're almost guaranteed to be overspending up to 40% of your total contract values, because it's so hard to make sense of all of that contract and billing data. And this overspending, as we're showing here, is occurring throughout the contract lifecycle. So whether you're sourcing a new deal, whether you're halfway through an existing contract, or even just not picking up on the billing mistakes, your vendor is inadvertently passing on, despite their best efforts, of course. So in order to...
Sorry, Richard, I just wanted to add here on, I mean, just for the SaaS software piece, I mean, there's a rule of thumb that says probably 30% of the software you buy is not actually used, or the licenses, and that's kind of like a rule of thumb that we can validate pretty much every time we do a data discovery. But what's happening now on top of kind of like that kind of wastage that happens for a lot of different reasons in companies. There's also the whole landscape of apps that central procurement, central IT don't even know about. Every time we do a data discovery, we find 50% more apps that no one knew about. It might not be a huge spend, but it's all duplications. It might be, shadow IT and so on. And it's just mind-boggling. So getting that kind of data in is super important.
And how do you get to grips with that then, guys? Because, I mean, Philip, you touched on a really good point, and we've all been in this situation, especially in more sort of immature or decentralized procurement teams. If you come in, in a greenfield role as an IT category manager, how do you get to grips then, you leveraging the software that each of you offer to deal with what I would call this desk drawer contract problem of, apps and software and and technology that central procurement doesn't know exists because, someone in IT in the organization has signed the contract and kept it on their C drive or in their desk drawer?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I think it's all about the data, right? You have to be able to find all the relevant data, gather it, analyze it, process it, and that takes time. If you're on your own, you don't have the tools and so on, you just never get around to covering all your spend. It's just not physically possible. So I think it's about getting a handle of the data and being able to process it quickly. Richard, what do you what's your point of view?
I completely agree, and we boiled this down to to a few key stages that we go through. Now for SaaS software, actually, I mean, I think document gathering goes hand in hand with data gathering. If we're looking at contracts and invoices for IT, then of course you need to find a place to go gather all those things. But you also need other methods to be able to gather, missing data. And one that resonated really, really well with me from a SaaS perspective was, if you are able to get into the account profiles of everyone, I think it's a single sign-on through Google or through Microsoft that you can tap into, then, I mean, we've seen this ourselves. When you actually go into the inventory of all the users and email addresses that you have, just sitting on some authentication platform somewhere like Microsoft or Google, you'll be surprised at how many people are still registered on your system that actually left the company last year, 2 years ago, or just duplicated because they moved on to a different role. But these are different strategies that we can follow to gathering the data that we need. For us on the thinking machine side, we focus more on the document side. So it's really more about identifying the suppliers, identifying who your suppliers are, being able to basically corral where all the correct detailed information would be. But then
Richard, sorry for jumping. I had on that point around the sort of like orphaned or redundant licenses. With one of my first customers, we noticed, when we'd done the data discovery, that there was a user that had left or hadn't well, we didn't know he had left or she had left 2 years ago, but obviously the account had not been used for 2 years. And obviously we brought it up with the IT manager, and he explained that account had been kept live because the manager's manager wanted to keep the data because there was some important project work and so on. So we went, okay, but now it's gone 2 years, so maybe we can turn it off. He must have retrieved all the relevant data. And then the IT manager goes, well, that manager's manager has left now as well, so I don't know what to do. So,
exactly.
Yeah, so you can see the challenge there.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, I personally get very excited about that stuff. I'm not sure how many other people would, but that's why we're the service providers. But I think it touches on a really important point that there's going to be so many different flavors of issues that you're going to identify along the way. And that's why it's so important to take a structured approach to how you do the analysis, because there is that risk that you can gather all the best data, you can put it all together, and then it just kind of falls flat because someone goes, yeah, someone else made that decision, and I don't want to make a bad call, so I'm just going to leave it. Which is why we've structured this to say, once you've gathered your data, great. Before you actually jump into the deep dive analytics, build out your fact base first, so that you've actually got a very clean, structured set of facts that will help work through all these things. Because I could imagine in your instance, you might end up having to make a recommendation to an executive or something, just kind of laying out what the risks are, laying out what the situation is, and then just asking them, do you want to go ahead switching this or not? And they need to have all those facts packaged up for them to enable them to make a decision, right?
Absolutely.
And from a fact-based perspective, there's a few key elements that we can bring together here. So, I mean, from a contract perspective, and it's funny how these things seem quite simple when you look on paper. They're really challenging to pull together when you've got hundreds or thousands of contracts to work through. But just finding out what the start and end dates are for your contracts is already a big one. I think a lot of people assume that their contracts are working as they should be, and then don't realize that contract actually expired last year. That could have been renewed or could have been renegotiated. Finding out if it does auto renew, because some contracts will have that, and I think this is really relevant in SaaS contracts, isn't it, Philip? Your renewal date might be on 31st of May. If it gets to the 1st of June, you are locked in for the next 12 months. Yeah. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah, no, it's not just that. It's you can have a lot of different licenses of the same software that are not concurrent. You know, they can be all staggered all over the place, right? So it becomes really, you know, if you know, they're rarely coterminous. So when is the real, you know, renewal date, you know? And by definition, when it works like that, you'll never be able to stop the renewals. They always auto renew. So,
and I've noticed how SaaS providers don't really like to give you any advance warning that your renewal date is coming up.
So how long does it typically take then? So just looking at this slide, Richard, how long does it typically take to do that? Because you need to, there's a lot of analysis that's involved here. So to get to the point where you can identify what your potential savings are, what typically, I mean, I know it's dependent on how good is the data and how centralized is that data held, but what do you see as a rule of thumb?
It touches on a big part of why providers like Thinking Machine and SaaSrooms, you know, are doing so well today, because doing this approach manually, or even trying to do it with technology of today or technology of yesterday, it takes a ridiculously long time, and it may not even be possible in the end because the information just becomes overwhelming and conflicting. How do you know how to make sense of the BT invoice versus the AT&T invoice versus, you know, any number of SaaS providers that you're looking at? You may just not be able to get the data correctly. From a spend optimization perspective, I think every person out there, every organization is challenged to be able to find these documents and get the data out of them in an efficient way. That's where you need, I guess, more modern solutions to being able to do this, because there will always be manual effort in identifying where the documents are and just collecting those base set of documents. But once you've actually got them, you need fine-tuned automation software, you know, not just say OCR, for example, but, you know, the extra functionality that will kind of do all the bits and pieces that need to be done to be able to extract all that data. So, you know, for Thinking Machine, we're able to take what used to be a 3-month deployment, and we can do that within 5 days, which on the surface sounds like an incredible improvement. But there's also an important point here, is that traditionally, when you're deploying software, the software provider needs to first understand your requirements. They need to understand exactly what they're building towards, you know, so that they can deploy the right thing for you. But when you're dealing with complex data, such as what SaaSrooms and Thinking Machine is dealing with within these IT categories, you don't actually know what your requirements are going to be until you've been able to fully explore the data and understand what's in there. So what platforms like ours are doing is we're automating that process of presenting that full picture back to you within just a few days, so that we can start to mold the solution. You know, it becomes an evolving process after that. The solution becomes molded and evolves to company-specific processes and your ways of working. So there's quite a little bit in there, James, but I think we can deploy something within a few days. How we identify those suppliers, just to finish up on that point, is oftentimes you won't know where to get the data from. Invoices will be summarized copies of information, you know, stored in the accounts payable system, not really suitable. It's usually good practice to just start with your spend queue, you know, something like what Simfoni does, or even just your spend analysis report that you have. Just identify who your suppliers are and go and ask them directly. It might take a little bit of time, but that will be the best way to get the detailed information you need. Philip, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to, even though we have, let's say, tools and methods that make us go faster, we whenever we work with a customer, it's also their kind of like data landscape that we depend on. So sometimes we can access all the data, load all the data immediately. Great, perfect world. But other times we have to say, oh, let's get the accounts payable first. Let's get the IT usage data then next. And then let's then get hold of the contracts, because if we don't have the user information, we don't know who to speak to get the contracts. So it's kind of, sometimes it's a little bit step by step, and we have to be pragmatic. But in the end, there's always ways of getting to a result. And even if you don't have all the data, if you just have 80% of the data, it's still good enough to get a result. So that's sort of, I think, how we look at it. But the main thing is, once you've done all that in a cycle, you get to a position, you want to make that repeatable and automate it, and then you improve it over time.
Got it. Thanks, guys. So what we're saying is then there's no piece of technology that can gather the data for you if that's sat within various parts of your organization. But once you've actually got that data, the process of grinding through that data, which would, to your point, Richard, have previously maybe been a 3-month consultancy project, that's something that both SaaSrooms and Thinking Machine can do in a matter of days rather than weeks and months. And once you've done it once, as you say, it's then something that's that's an automated process rather than a manual exercise that you have to do each and every time.
Exactly. And maybe for the blockchain enthusiasts, maybe at some point in the future, all vendors and procurement will publish their contracts and invoices on a secure blockchain where we can immediately access them. But for the moment, definitely a manual process.
I admire your optimism.
Oh, yes. So let's take a step forward to, you've collected all those documents, and as we just went through, you may have gone to your spend reporting queue, found your list of suppliers, gone to your suppliers, gotten all the documents from them. Perhaps you've complemented that with some contracts or purchase orders that you have in your contract management system. You've extracted all that data, you've got your fact base. Now let's do the deep dive analysis. And these are 4 key areas that, Philip was describing before, that scenario, talking with the boss about a long departed employee. There'll be so many flavors of these things that will come out, but broadly speaking, we can categorize them over these 4 areas. The first one that we're looking at is billing mistakes. Now, billing mistakes are important from a couple of perspectives. For one thing, billing mistakes mean you're getting charged more than you should have been. So definitely you want to find those mistakes and have that money refunded back to you. It gives you more certainty in your invoices and your budgetary process moving forward. Might also find you some much needed savings. But also from a negotiation perspective, but when it comes time to go through a new sourcing event, knowing how your supplier is performing and having all the facts that you can to improve your negotiation position, doing a historical billing audit helps with that quite a bit. If your vendor is perfect, then great, we can move on. Fact is, 3% of all invoice charges are billing mistakes. That can be used as part of your negotiations to make sure that you're getting the best possible outcome that you can. And we were just on a call, a moment ago with the CIO, showing them some different examples of these things. And they saw this first example about tax rates, and they went, oh my God, we have been doing a multi-year cost optimization review. As far as I was concerned, we had looked under everything. We never thought to look at tax rates. And this is a really interesting one, especially if you're part of a company that has a global footprint. You never know. Your contracts may not actually even specify what your tax rate should be. Or there may be some misalignment where it specifies one thing and you're getting charged another. It's good to be able to look at everything here of what your prices were, what discounts you got, what services they were. Look at it from every which angle, because you never know what you're going to turn up. One last little flavor on this one. We recently found, tax rates being one. We also look at IT services, and especially it's good to look at professional service contracts more from a risk management perspective. But when you're looking at professional service contracts, you can, well, hopefully your contract has a rate schedule in there where it actually specifies what sort of rate code and the daily rate and job seniority of the person contracting out should be. But when you get down to that level of detail, you do often find people charging at a higher rate than they should be. Someone who may be doing junior work, for example, charging at a much more senior hours that you just wouldn't pick up on because, frankly, the Big Four collects such large top line fees anyway. You wouldn't really know until you dig into it. Philip, what kind of billing mistakes do you normally see from a SaaS perspective?
Well, we try to avoid them by plugging in a kind of like a payment solution, dedicated payment cards for mainly, you usually find a long list of small SaaS subscription that you never have time to check up on, and the return on investment having to check up on all that if you're a finance manager and so on, it's just not worth it really. So it tends to be overlooked. But what we promote is basically individual payment cards per vendor that you can log into that vendor, and you can lock in the amounts. So that way you sort of have an upfront lock-in of what you can actually get charged, and it takes care of let's say potential overcharging. So that's probably the sort of the way we try and look at it, because it's so fragmented, all of this. So you kind of have to do something proactive to get the grips of it.
Great. Sorry, I was on mute. We've had a question come in from a gentleman called Dariusz, and his question is the optimization opportunity on the demand side only? Not sure which one of you wants to tackle that one.
Well, I can have a go. Not sure about. You can always, Darius. You can always add to your question. I think when you go and look at so SaaS in particular, if you know already that there's a significant amount of wastage that you've overestimated the demand, that's usually where you get the biggest bang for your buck, if you can rationalize that. So that's certainly an area where we focus. But clearly, understanding your whole requirement profile also helps, but it's a bit more complex, obviously, and it's down to what's going on each single application.
I think optimization can mean a lot of different things to different areas depending on how you're looking at it. Looking at, say, SaaS software, or as what we're showing on the slide here, this is particularly relevant for telecom or cloud platforms. You can look at optimization on the demand side by saying, well, what is the demand profile? What do I actually need for what we use? My favorite example being companies paying for 100 terabytes of data when they really only needed 5. On the other hand, you can take a more generalist view at it, that optimization is just taking multiple perspectives together and looking for opportunities in between. And what we find from that is your contract pricing could be optimized, how your negotiation process works, could be optimized, even how, if you're a supplier, how you're selling your services out to your customers. There's a lot of different flavors on how you can look at this. I think a lot of these things come down to challenging our assumptions, challenging what buffers we think we need to have in place, and then removing some of those barriers and removing some of that friction to make the deal as good as possible. Hopefully that adds a little bit of flavor to your question.
Excellent, thanks, Richard. Okay, yeah, let's move on.
Great. And I guess on a similar line to this, we made this a specific item to look at product optimization, because too often we get very hung up on the line items that you actually see from your invoices. What is your SaaS software actually called? Thinking machines, SaaSrooms, whatever the name might be. Even the product itself is basically arbitrary. Products are marketing terms that have been made up to describe a bundle of services that you're actually getting. What you actually care about is not the product, you care about the service that you're receiving. Now, it's not always easy to do, but what you want to do is link the services that you're actually getting to your products, because what you often find is that you're paying for hidden redundancy that you didn't even know you had. So we have an example here where a utility company within the UK was paying about 100,000 a year for a premium fault restoration product, enhanced ultimate SLA or whatever the product was called. But when you actually dug into the service that provided, it turned out the MSA already gave that same service outcome for free. The 100K was completely pointless because the contract was already providing that service just as part of the package. That's an extreme example, but at a lower level, you will find that many of your products, even paying 10, 15 bucks a month for that add up, may well be doing the same thing. And service utilization. I mean, I think this is very interesting from a software perspective, because it's very difficult to actually dig into, are you even using the software in the first place? So I'm sure there's various ways of doing that. And you could probably come up with a different way of explaining service utilization for every category of IT. If it's SaaS software, maybe, not an expert, but perhaps when the last time the SaaS thing was logged into. If it's telecom, are you actually making calls? Are you actually using data? Is it actually being used? If it's your data networking, and this is a big one, what's the network traffic? Do you have a circuit that maybe you thought was there as a important redundancy line that actually belongs to a office that was shut down years ago? It's always good to find some way of overlaying your services with something to indicate whether they're even being used or not. And first, if they are being used, then you can go to the second layer of, are you paying for overconsumption that you don't really need to be?
So Richard, where would be the? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go on. So go on, James.
No, I was just going to ask Richard. So, how would you go about getting that data? Would that be the telecom solution provider that would be able to give that itemized level of data and breakdown?
Well, as always, it depends. For telecom services like telephone and mobiles, just get an itemized version of your invoices. That utilization detail will actually be shown directly on the invoice, which makes life a little bit easier. If you're looking at data networking, generally you do need to have a chat with your IT application manager. So we're looking for network systems like SolarWinds that can give you an export of the traffic that's coming in and out. And even if we're thinking of service utilization for something like professional services, you can actually start to look at your HR system. How many hours was actually logged against that consultant for the last 1, 3, 6 months? Does it actually match with with what you're showing on the invoice or on the contract? And for SaaS, I'll let Philip answer that.
Yeah, I mean this kind of like service utilization piece is very interesting, and SaaS vendors obviously want to get as many depending on the kind of like the commercial model, but often want to onboard, land and expand in the client, get as many users onto the platform for any type of use as quickly as possible, and out to the widest user base as possible. One of the sort of small features is making any productivity app or other sort of service type of app in an organization, just making reporting available within a team, within a department, and so on, creates an immediate uptake of the application. Obviously, pushes up your subscription package significantly, although you're only accessing the software for a report once every 3 months. And this is something when we do the analysis, we get these sort of charts, these bar charts, where at one end you have a very small user group that use very often, and then there's just like a long flat tail of individual users who've only logged in one time. And when you see that kind of data profile, you know immediately that these users have come in to get a monthly report or a quarterly report. And then you can obviously ask yourself, well, is that really worth paying the extra amount of money for or not, and then try and scale it back or manage it in a different way.
Right. Okay. So now the presentation didn't allow for animated PowerPoint slides, so that's why our stickman there has 6 arms. But I'm sure you get the point.
Everyone can need an extra hand. I mean,
exactly. So what we're looking at here is some best practices around implementation. And I guess we're just trying to share some experience here from, even if you have the best data, you found the best opportunities, implementation can still be a stumbling block. Philip's example earlier on about, you get all the way to the manager and then the manager goes, maybe I just don't want to take that decision. Or some stumbling block with internal stakeholders, difficulties with your vendors, things like that. Some of the most common challenges that we've seen, you find these billing mistakes, you do a great audit, you find all these issues that need to be investigated, you go to the vendor, they just dismiss your claims. And not necessarily we've investigated that and we don't agree, just simply no. And then you just get lost in the vortex, of a big vendor kind of pushing from pillar to post. The data sources that you get about your employees and your internal services, so these things that are very good reference points to have when you're doing your analysis. Of course, internal systems can just be completely out of date, and the data that you're looking at may not even be accurate. And we find this particularly when we're looking at user profiles, for say software licenses or or telecom licenses, is you can't really trust the user data half the time because it's probably out of date. It's been pushed to somebody else. No one did the update, but it's still meant to be getting used. So that inaccuracy of data is a challenge. And then finally, just difficulty getting other departments to help out. You may be procurement, and then actually getting the IT manager to do their bit isn't always the easiest thing. So some of the best practices that we've seen help with these challenges, and this first one is why it's so important to have a clear fact base. When it comes to billing mistakes, think of it like an auditor. Always let the facts do the talking. Vendors will do everything they can to avoid the extra work. So if you introduce any uncertainty or any ambiguity into it, they will just dismiss it half the time. So always communicate with them from your fact base and don't let them move on until they answer every item that you've got set up. Second, set up workflows that allow for validation to occur. It's a fact of life that data will be incomplete, inaccurate, and just not like the way that we'd like it to be. You need a workflow set up so that you can actually use that and leverage that as part of the process. So, for example, don't just switch off a mobile phone because the data says that the user ID left the company last year. Send a notification first, and then manage the responses from there. And then perhaps after an appropriate time frame, then switch it off. Third, use workflows to clearly show roles and responsibilities across departments. Because if you can show, a stakeholder in the IT area exactly what the end-to-end process is meant to be, it's much easier to get them to buy in when they can see what that business value is going to be. And then finally, have a positive mindset. And I know that sounds a bit corny, but it's important to adapt to feedback and refine your process. Don't give up on things if you find a mistake, a little bit through it, no matter how much time you spent on it. Just keep updating your assumptions, keep going. Would you have anything to add to that, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, just I guess just to add to the last point, it's important to be pragmatic, right? You're dealing with data. It's not always 100%, but make sure you understand what's in there, what's not in there, and then work accordingly. And don't give up because you don't have absolutely everything, because usually you can still get some results anyways. And then probably, as I mentioned then earlier, and then over time you'll improve. You'll find the rest of the data. You'll find ways of getting in everything into one place, and you'll improve. So.
Absolutely. I mean, it is definitely possible to do this sort of work without vendors like Thinking Machine, SaaSrooms, Simfoni. The challenges and the biggest roadblock to doing these things is just resources. It takes a really long time to do it yourself. But if this is something that you're committed to, and you are committed that you want to do that yourself, hopefully we've been able to give you some useful tools and tricks here. If you are interested, I love talking about this, as you probably can tell. Please get in touch. I'm always happy to share my views on tools and technologies and things you can use, without necessarily just signing up to something. But again, from everything that we've covered, you can probably see how complex these processes get, and that's exactly why spend optimization platforms like SaaSrooms and Thinking Machine exists, to help streamline and automate those processes for you, so you can just focus more on managing the results that we bring to you rather than having to mine those results yourself. Okay. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Okay, so Richard, Philip, thank you for that presentation. I'm going to bring Stefan in now, who's been patiently waiting on the panel. So Stefan, obviously with your Simfoni hat on, SaaSrooms and Thinking Machine, in terms of what they do, are very much focused on the IT side, on the SaaS and on the telecoms and wider IT spend. Just walk us through Simfoni being a more generic product in terms of managing spend and doing spend management and analytics as a service. And I know you're into quite a lot of tail spend management as well with what you do. So just bring all of this together for us holistically and walk us through how this can be brought under that same umbrella.
Yeah, I'll bring this to life, because I think what's important for people to understand from this is that it's really about the speed to value, okay, and also the specialisms, okay, that both Thinking Machine and SaaSrooms bring. So I started off in the introduction saying that actually I started my career out in IT category management. And in that space, as you said, it's really difficult. You've got huge amounts of data across IT professional services, telecoms, cloud services, etc. And you've got this abundance of data, and it's really difficult to get your arms around it. And not many people are that successful in doing it. They do niche projects or particular projects, and they kind of sort of struggle with that quantum of data. So like I sort of joked about the intro, I mean, it's a long time ago I was doing that role, but I really wish that solutions like SaaSrooms and Thinking Machine were around back in my day, because what it enables you to do, and this is what we do at Simfoni, to your point, is that we leverage their best of breed solutions. Okay, so the whole market, by the way, is shifting back, almost back in time, if you like, towards niche best of breed solutions. So we don't cover everything. As you say, we cover all spend, okay, but then we go super deep into certain categories. When we come into the territory of IT, we basically employ both Thinking Machine and SaaSrooms to do a detailed teardown of that spend. And it is really quick. Okay, so we take the data from the client. Okay, that includes contract data, payables data, vendor master data, everything that Philip and Richard said. And then Philip's team and Richard's team work with us to go super deep, and they go super quick into that data to find all this richness of savings opportunities. Typically, we get big savings within the first month, typically from the incumbent vendors. We don't even need to switch vendors, because you've got these billing errors. I think Richard spoke about the sort of 3%. I would argue it's often higher than that. You've got things like charging for software that's not being used, or telecom lines that are not even being used. You can go back and claim that overbilling, typically for the last 5 to 7 years, and Richard's team will actually help you to do that. And then you can, I call it fix the house. So you've got all these, leaky roof house, you've got gaps in the floorboards, whatever it is, where you're leaking value, but because the data is so difficult to mine from a human, you can't see it. So these applications take on huge data sets. Okay, you're talking about telecoms billing. Back in my day, I used to see these telecom bills coming in. Okay, they're huge, and there's no way that a human can crunch that quantum of data. So it rapidly finds sources of value. it enables us, like our sourcing team, for example, to use that data from SaaSrooms and Thinking Machine to have those quite interesting and pointed conversations with the vendors around overbilling, billing errors, this type of thing. And we get savings within the first month, okay, within the first couple of weeks. Then what we do, so we do like a hop, skip, and a jump, is clients happy because they get savings landed really quickly. They get visibility of their spend. And as I say, typically we get savings with the incumbent. So there's no big change management in the first period. We then might further optimize that spend by doing tariff benchmarking, particularly in telecoms or cloud. And then that might, lead to an opportunity to run a sourcing event, okay, using Thinking Machine and SaaSrooms to support that as well. And SaaSrooms, for example, bring in some wonderful discounts from some of those SaaS vendors because they're doing this for many clients around the world. And so therefore their spend leverage is arguably, often higher for pieces of software than you on your own. So as you can probably tell, I love what these do. Simfoni's got, we're really well known for what we do in spend analytics. We are blindingly good at what we do, but we're not afraid to go and partner with niche providers such as these two companies to actually go then super deep into that particular category. We do it in other categories as well, but we're talking about the world of IT today, and the results are just phenomenal. And so really what it looks at here, if I was the IT category manager today, or I'm in IT as a service manager, for example, I should be looking at these solutions, whether it's via Simfoni or direct, whatever, because a human just cannot do what these platforms do, and they pay for themselves in days. So as you can tell, I've got a pretty strong perspective on this, having lived and breathed it from the age-old way of doing it and through to what we do today. And we're just super pleased from our partnership with these two businesses and our clients benefit.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. And that really just highlights the fact that even if you've got a really comprehensive process or system or tool, in your case, spend analytics, there are certain categories, MRO is another one that's so specialized and so detailed that, you often need to dig a little bit deeper to be able to unravel the savings and get to grips with the data when you've got thousands of users or thousands of different part numbers in the case of MRO and spare parts. So final question that we've had come in, it's a little bit vague, but I will ask it anyway. And that is, what are your experiences of optimizing with Microsoft? I'm afraid it doesn't give any more detail than that. So we're going to have to try and interpret that as best we can.
I'm happy to take that one. With Microsoft, a lot of companies don't really expect that you can negotiate anything with Microsoft. You just pay the list price and that's it. But you can actually negotiate with them. So there's opportunity, obviously, for some price improvement going in or renewing your Microsoft contract. But probably mostly it's if you get a really good read on your usage of Microsoft and all the licenses and so on, and then work closely with your IT manager who's responsible for it, then you can usually rationalize the user base, considerably. And given it's usually one of the biggest spends because everyone has it in the company, it's significant amounts you can find there. So usage and price, definitely.
Usage and price, great, thank you. Okay, so that wraps up for today. Just a quick note. So just to say again at the beginning, we have been recording this, so we will send you the recording for everyone that registered after the webinar. So if you did have to jump off for a few minutes, don't worry. And just a quick heads up to say that we're going to be planning another webinar for the 8th of March. Subject and confirmation of that to follow shortly. So just pop that date in your calendar if you found this one useful. And if you'd like to reach out to any of the gentlemen who have been on the webinar today, they are available on LinkedIn. Reach out, connect with them, and they would love to chat to you if you've got any follow-up questions that you weren't able to tackle on this webinar today. So thank you everyone for attending. Thanks to our panel and to our presenters. Look after yourselves. Have a great rest of your week wherever you are, and we will catch you again very, very soon. Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye.